Really exciting. Thanks so much. My name is Michael Green. I'm the Executive Director of Climate Action Business Association, humbly located in the Old West Church in downtown Boston on the backside of Beacon Hill. Encourage you guys to come down and visit us at our space there. Home of the phrase "no taxation without representation" was also part of the Underground Railroad, and in more recent history, the voting place for JFK and Jackie O during the 1960 election. So building's been around the city for a while, and it's quite an interesting location when you start looking at infrastructure, resiliency, and how we can build things in downtown Boston that will last 200 years, if not more in our case. So I'm going to be talking to you guys a little bit about a different perspective, one that for many of you, it's more of the user, the end user kind of persona, and what happens after a building's been designed, and predominantly in the commercial space, and then who's inhabiting it, how they're getting this kind of information about climate resiliency, what it means for them. We get to speak at CABA from a little bit of a point of personal knowledge, and we'll get into that since we actually had a building that was flooded out. And also talking a little bit about our campaign that we started in downtown Boston called Businesses Acting on Rising Seas. We've since taken that to across the state and are now going to be actually rolling it out in not planned, but actually Florida and Texas, which we have been working on for about the last 8 months. Now is more important than ever, I guess, in both of those locations. So let's get right to it here. All right. So a pretty popular site. I think the poor town of Scituate has been used in just about every single image opportunity to talk about climate resiliency here in Massachusetts. And we're quite fortunate that we will actually be bringing the local state rep from Scituate to the climate negotiations in Bonn, Germany later this November, actually to discuss resiliency, and that adaptation isn't just something that's happening in small island states, but also happening in coastal communities in the United States of America and in Massachusetts. So hats off to the kind of typical picture of Scituate. This was actually a sunny day there. Get you guys to laugh a little bit early here in the morning. Thanks for being here kind of early. All right. So I'm not going to get too much into it because we have some awesome speakers that are going to be talking more about the Climate Ready Boston and some of the assessments that were done there and what it really means for the city to be thinking about the future projections. There's been some of the things that, in looking at sea level rise and the projections there and how we're building, I think are going to be well covered, and I think are important discussions to be had. There's one piece that did come up that I don't have on this slide, but that was looking at not just the sea level projections, but also the heat projections. Right now, I think it's, correct me if I'm wrong, people probably know the report better than I do, but I believe it's between 11 and 14 days average over 90 degrees in the city of Boston per year, 11 to 14 days. And according to the Climate Ready Boston report, we could expect up to 90 days with 90 degrees or more by 2070. That's towards the upward projection. I sat in a room of Northeastern students, big lecture hall, and it just, you could hear a pin drop in the room once they thought of that. Because for a lot of those students, they're still very much in their career, and they are starting families. They may be living in the Northeast, and for folks that are not from New England and are from the Southeast or Mid or Southwest, when they hear 90 days of 90 degrees in Boston by mid to late century, you can only imagine what that means for the rest of the country. So while my remarks will be focusing a lot on resiliency for coastal communities due to sea level rise and extreme weather events, the heat is certainly no joke and something that we need to strongly be considering in our planning. As someone who is in a 200-year-old church, we have massive windows that we had to get custom AC units built for, and it's still just about 80 degrees every single day in there. That's to say that our older building stock here in the city is certainly going to be levels of challenges especially if you're a national historic landmark like we are, and how you're going to go about addressing some of these challenges with future heat. So this is a map that many of you are familiar with here with the city of Boston. And one of the things that when we started looking at how we're going to talk to small businesses, a lot of us may be looking at this and seeing locations for where we've currently built or building in the future. But one of the things that really stood out to me is the different challenges that you don't see in this map that are faced by these communities. Those challenges are language barriers. Those challenges are also the relationship with the city in many cases. Now in Boston, we have a better relationship with a lot of our communities and neighborhoods, and hats off to us. That's not the case in every city. One of the things that we're dealing with in Miami Beach is that in the city of Miami Beach, they actually were able to raise the road due to sunny day flooding. This is flooding that happens because of high tide based on ocean water infiltration into sewer systems and other issues. And one of the things that they decided to do, it was to raise the grade of one of the main streets that had been seeing this flooding the most often. Now what happened was, of course, they got a torrential rain event in Miami Beach. They had also put in a new pump system that was immediately broken upon this torrential rain event. And what happened when the small businesses who had all of the water flow off the now raised street into their small businesses and homes, what happened when they went to the insurance companies? Insurance companies said, "We don't insure basements in Florida." And they said, "Well, we're not a basement." And they said, "You're below grade. You are a basement." We laugh, but it's a horrifying story of now the city cannot even go into these small businesses and start a conversation on coastal resiliency or adaptation, what needs to be happening because of these mistakes and kind of other issues. Now, other things that I want to think of a little bit more close to home here. The relationship of small businesses and municipal officials. To this point, a lot of it is around licensing. A lot of the relationships are around permitting processes. When the city walks in to a small business, a lot of times you're not facing necessarily the business owner, maybe you get a manager, but what's that person's first thought? Oh no, the kitchen isn't as clean as it should be. Or, oh, that bathroom in the back isn't built properly, isn't to code. They're used to the city playing an inspectoral relationship and coming in and challenging or pushing the small business to take steps to meet different priorities of the city. And because of that, it somewhat creates an adversarial challenge. And that's before you even get into language barriers, right? Between the different communities speaking Spanish in East Boston, or whether it's Chinatown. The information that's being put out isn't even understood by a majority of the people working in the business because it's not reaching out to them in the language that they speak. So it creates another host of challenges. So one of the things that we were thinking about and looking at when we see this map is not just understanding the future threat challenges, but also the compiling of those challenges based on cultural or other issues that those communities are already facing, and how do we take that into account with any kind of planning or process that we put forward in order to reach out to these communities. Okay, so again, this is one of the less horrifying maps, but we're looking at our emissions scenarios, and this isn't just a Massachusetts issue, this is a global issue, right? But looking at what that means for sea level rise and the issues for these coastal communities that are already feeling these challenges, it's actually kind of quite horrifying. For me, I did master's post work at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, did my undergrad at Northeastern University, and I remember during the beginning of my classwork, circa 2006, so a little bit over 10 years ago, And we were talking about climate change and the threat of climate change in hundreds of years from now. And here we are 10 years later, and now we're talking about the threats of climate change and issues, the sea level rise that we're already seeing, and now end of century. This is very much went from a challenge that a lot of us said, future generations, to, oh no, that future generation is 18 years old right now. So it's very much something that people that are currently on this planet are going to have to deal with when we look at some of these high emission scenarios and worst case scenarios towards the end of the century. So I want to get into a little bit about kind of what drove us to take on the BARS program. And really one of the things that actually led to the beginning of Climate Action Business Association, I can maybe in my closing remarks tell you a little bit more about what we're up to, was actually Hurricane Sandy. The community that Hurricane Sandy hit in Breezy Point in New Jersey was really kind of the point of impact, and what they face as a small business community was actually is a challenge that we need to be thinking about, and that is how many of those small businesses don't reopen after a extreme weather event or even a boom event, call it. And that number, it's high and dangerous, because what that does mean is not just, okay, that small business is no longer there. That also means that those tax dollars are no longer there. That means that those jobs for the communities, the service that it was able to provide is no longer there. And then who's moving into those places? It's not that mom and pop shop, but it might be that large corporate Walgreens or something along those lines. Sorry, I don't mean to throw Walgreens out under the bus. My uncle works there. It's a great place. But that's an issue that when we start to lose that fabric, that relationship with our community, it means a lot more than just, okay, small business owner is no longer there. So looking at that $3,000 a day was actually calculated out of the barrage of snowstorms that we had 2 years ago, sitting and talking with our small business owners and what it meant for them to have downtime for one day. $3,000. If you talk to a small mom and pop retail store, or even some of our retail stores on the main thoroughfares in Boston, $3,000 a day is bad. You miss 2 days or 3 days, or in particular winter where we had 1 or 2 days a week for almost a month where businesses were closed. And now all of a sudden they're sitting around the table late at night thinking, wait a second, are we going to have to close our doors? Is this, we've certainly missed our quarter. Are we going to still be able to make our year? What does this mean for the future of the business? And also when you're talking with these business owners, the idea of capital investment into resiliency for their business, let alone capital investment into rebuilding their business, if it's been destroyed, flooded, or had some other issues, is about as distant from them and their ability as you actually probably would imagine. Small businesses don't have access to the capital that the banking commercials that run during the Patriots games on Sunday make you think they have access to. So it's really very much a challenge that they're facing. That $3,000 a day is easy for a larger business. They're able to maybe source materials from another location. They have 5 other stores in the greater Boston area that are up and running that day, so that one location that's closed down doesn't mean as much. But when your brick and mortar is just that one brick and mortar, that $3,000 a day adds up quickly, and it continues to be a challenge for the community of Breezy Point. Because those small businesses haven't opened back up, home property values have gone down, school system is starting to suffer and seeing challenges and asking for more money from the state. It's not just the businesses leaving, it then starts to ripple into the rest of the fabric of that community. So getting into a little bit about kind of our story and what happened. So the winter of 2016, on that President's Day, It was an extremely cold Saturday and Sunday. Some of you guys might remember it's one of the few times in the last few years where in greater Boston area it's dropped below zero. And what happened for us, it was a gentleman on the third floor who didn't install a shower to code. And worse, he had an employee leave a window in that in particular bathroom open over the weekend. What happened? Of course, the pipe breaks somewhere in the shower, and it floods that floor, which the water picked any nook and cranny it could to run onto the second floor, which then for us on the first floor, it kind of had a pyramid effect, right? The issue was just the bathroom on their floor. The second floor was just about destroyed. And then on our floor on the first, we had about 8 inches of water, as well as all of our printing, computers, paperwork that was critical for the organization was just about destroyed. You can imagine as a guy that's 27 years old at the time trying to start your own nonprofit and get it off the ground, that was close to being a nail in the coffin, right? And fortunately enough for us, we really had our community rally around us. The great team over at CIC over on in Cambridge opened up their doors and let us have officing there for free for about 2 months. But it was a oh crap moment really for us, because you walk in, just got out of a long weekend, the last thing you're thinking about is I need to deal with a crisis that's happening at my small business. And it created all these other questions for us of, well, what is the communication? I didn't even know, out of my small staff, who do I call right now? What do I tell them to do? Where do I tell them to go? Is it safe to be here? I had no idea what was actually in the 2 floors above me. So the water that had drained down, the building was in Southie, it was kind of old. I had no idea if it was even a health hazard to be in the location, let alone the challenges of electricity. Things are all still plugged in. You're running through the horror stories in your head of bringing an employee into that space and the liability. Let alone, okay, well, I can't clean this up by myself. What do I do? So there was a lot of things that at that moment that we could have had in place that would have allowed us to be able to move, pivot, whatever you want to call it, quickly into not just having to be reactions, but having real solutions that we can depend on. And then how do we take those, create best practices, and start thinking about sharing that with other small business owners and other people where they're already in high-risk zones. While we were in Southie, we were in Andrew Square, pretty far away from the coast. We weren't in a high-risk zone, yet we still got flooded. Kind of a funny situation there. So not just us, but there was also, there was 4 other businesses in that building that had to deal with these challenges. So we started a campaign called Businesses Acting on Rising Seas. Those are some of the locations that we went to, but we got to work with Coastal Zone Management, and we identified the 19 highest risk coastal zones with small businesses in them from Fall River up to Newburyport. And we decided that we were going to create a guide. It gave 10 steps that don't require capital investment that you can do right now as a small business owner to go out and make your business more prepared for that boom or catastrophic event. That covers everything from making sure, as I learned, you have a communication strategy in place with your employees. You know where you're sending them, to ideas of know where critical infrastructure is. In my head, I'm thinking, okay, my IRS letter with my EIN giving us 501c3 status, where is that right now in my office? Let's get that out of here. Okay, payroll stuff, I need to get that. Where is that? Not having things ready to be swooped out definitely was a challenge. So making sure you know not just critical paperwork, but also is there a generator on site? Is there hazardous materials on site? Do you have your fryer grease in your basement for some of the small businesses that we talk to and small restaurants? You think it's bad to clean up after a flood. Imagine what it's like to clean up after a flood if you had old kitchen grease in your basement that has now coated the entire inside of your small business. That adds about 30x to the cleanup cost for that business. So these things that can be put in place, and we can send this out, and some of the tactics that we went over with these small businesses to make them more resilient. Now, for us, it wasn't about just helping the small businesses. It was also about helping the city of Boston. I talked about earlier about some of those challenges in communication and the barriers that already exist between small businesses, communities, and the municipalities in which they're in. And how can we create some information to go back to them with to make them more effective down the road? So while we were going door to door, knocking and talking to these small business owners, we were also walking them through a survey. It's really interesting that you're here in downtown Newburyport. What's your relationship with the city of Newburyport been like? And have you taken advantage of any of the resiliency planning or things that they've put in place? No? Oh, okay. And we're just kind of checking off the box. What we found, is it was pretty much predictable. About 95% or so of the small businesses that we surveyed had no extreme weather or plan in place for a challenge like this. So how do we go about helping them create that plan? I thought it was disheartening. This was prior to Climate Ready Boston really ramping up in some of their communication tactics over the past year and a half. But I had about 2% of the small businesses surveyed in the city of Boston actually knew what Climate Ready Boston was. So if we're putting this information out, how are we putting it out, and how do we get it into the hands of small business owners? You get to this challenge of, we want to reach out to communities and we want to reach out to businesses, and for some reason we constantly think about these things as one as the other. But really what happens, a lot of you guys have been there. If you live in the city like I do, in the South End, the snowstorm hits. You finally go outside after a day or two, and what is it? It's dead quiet. Everything's covered in snow. You dig out, and you start to go for a walk down the street. You think it's funny because you can walk down the middle of the street and nobody gives you a hard time. And as you're walking in the foreground, out in front of you, you can see the lights on. And the lights on is that local small business, it's that local coffee shop, it's that local restaurant that you can go in, get a hot cup of coffee, talk with them, talk about the storm, meet up with your neighbors. That's kind of like a New England kind of kitschy way that this works out. But in other issues where there's massive flooding events or others, those same small businesses that have their lights on with a hot cup of coffee also can provide a place for you to charge your cell phone and let you use your phone to let loved ones know you're okay. They can administer basic health needs and supplies. We saw this in Hurricane Sandy. We've seen this more recently in Houston, where the small business owner turned into the only opportunity to reach out to the community in a lot of locations, and was the only person there to help the people living in those neighborhoods. So the importance of small businesses and reaching out to them can't be understated. I'm running short on time, so I'm just going to kind of rip through my last few slides here. There's policy and legislation, and during our networking opportunity, I'd love to talk with anyone about the comprehensive adaptation management plan, as well as the executive order that came out from the Baker administration that looks into creating guidelines around resiliency. I recognize some of your faces from the public hearings that have happened on this. We're very strong supporters of Senator Pacheco's legislation there. The last thing I'll just touch on is we're constantly thinking about this in the terms of 100 years or longer. This is the projections and the actual track of Hurricane Superstorm Sandy. It took 7 days from it to show up on the Weather Channel as a tropical depression to it hitting New York. So while we find comfort in thinking about this in long-term scopes, unfortunately, the height of hurricane season is usually around September 10th, September 13th, so we're right in the thick of it right now. As we get later, the hurricanes change their trajectory more northward. So 100 years is nice to think about planning, but it actually takes about 7 days for a storm to form and hit the coast. Thanks.